He lied about being engaged to protect his empire. But the woman who showed up to play his fiancée wasn't human. Elegant. Mysterious. She had eyes that remembered centuries. And secrets that could burn the world. Now, the cold billionaire is marked, bound by a favor he never understood. And she's come to collect. Chapter 1, The Deal with the Devil. The world whispered his name like a warning. Damon Thorne, the billionaire no one dared cross, the king of the skyline whose empire rested on steel, power, and silence. He was the storm behind boardroom walls, the shadow that haunted financial headlines, the man who never bent, never bowed, and never let anyone close enough to touch the ice that pulsed through his veins. But behind the luxury glass walls of his penthouse, a single truth threatened to undo him. His empire, his legacy, all of it stood at the mercy of a decision he never intended to make. It had started with one careless lie. A lie thrown like a dagger across a dinner table with his aging grandfather, Reginald Thorne, the ruthless founder of Thorne Industries. The old man, still sharp despite his years, had demanded to see the stability of the next generation before handing over full control of the company. Marriage, he said, was the proof of a grounded man. An heir was the symbol of continuity. And Damon, in a moment of sharp arrogance and annoyance, had declared himself already engaged. That lie now hung around his neck like a noose. 30 days. That's all Reginald had given him. 30 days to produce the woman he had claimed as his fiancée, or lose the company to his cousin Matthew, a smiling snake wrapped in family skin. And so, the man who had everything found himself cornered. Damon searched quietly, methodically, for a woman who could play the role, someone flawless, polished, and disposable. But fate had other plans. Or perhaps, something older than fate. She arrived uninvited, wrapped in midnight. No one had seen her enter, and yet she stood in his private elevator, untouched by the rain that danced against the windows. Her presence was like a pause in time. She didn't belong in his world, and yet she fit into it like an ancient key slipping into a forgotten lock. She had a name that felt whispered by flames, Seraphina Blackwood. She was not beautiful in the way models were. No, her beauty was dangerous. Unexplainable. She carried the stillness of forests at dusk, the depth of oceans unseen. Her eyes held storms not yet born, and her silence felt louder than words. Without asking, she made him an offer. A contract of sorts, 30 days of perfection. She would be the fiancée the world expected. Polished, poised, persuasive. In return, she asked for a single favor. Not now. Later. When the time came. She promised nothing but results. No emotions. No strings. Just business. It should have comforted Damon, but instead, it left a strange tremor in his spine. He signed. Because Damon Thorne didn't believe in magic. Only results. But that night, something changed. The fire in the hearth flickered oddly, as if wind had crept in where none existed. His reflection in the glass distorted for just a moment, and in the corner of his eye, her silhouette appeared behind him. Not in the room. Only in the reflection. He turned. Nothing. Just silence and rain. Yet a whisper echoed through him. A whisper not made of words, but of knowing. She was not what she claimed to be. And he was no longer the man in control. Chapter 2, The Dinner of Shadows. The city roared beneath him, but Damon Thorne heard nothing. High above the noise of Manhattan, behind the shimmering walls of his glass tower, he prepared for a dinner that was meant to save his empire. But even his practiced calm felt thinner tonight. The air in the penthouse was colder, heavier, as though something invisible had stepped into the room and made itself at home. Seraphina Blackwood had arrived again, exactly on time, dressed in dark velvet that shimmered like ink under candlelight. She hadn't spoken a word when she walked in. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything, bold, silent, and sovereign. She was not playing the role of a fiancée. She was becoming it, molding the world around her into a version where she had always belonged. And somehow, the more she leaned into the lie, the more real it began to feel. Tonight was the test. The first time she would meet Reginald Thorne. The grandfather who built Thorne Industries with blood and brilliance. The man who still held the final vote on the future of the family's empire. Damon had survived boardrooms, scandals, and threats, but he knew that one raised brow from Reginald could undo it all. This dinner wasn't about food or conversation. It was a battlefield wrapped in table linens. Serafina, however, showed no fear. She sat across from Reginald with quiet command, her posture regal, her eyes watchful. She spoke when needed, listened when required, and smiled only when it served the moment. She had done her research. She knew Reginald's war record, his favorite whiskey, his obsession with old Roman architecture. She didn't flatter, she impressed. Effortlessly. Damon watched it unfold with a strange tightness in his chest. He had seen women perform before, charmers, climbers, actresses who rehearsed affection like lines in a play. But Serafina wasn't performing. She became the role. Reginald, sharp as ever, tested her with questions, theories, philosophical traps laced with Thorne arrogance. Serafina didn't flinch. She didn't fall into the bait. She redirected, reflected, and turned every question into an answer that satisfied without surrendering too much of herself. And Damon, who had expected a game, began to feel the rules shifting under his feet. But then came the real threat. Matthew. The cousin with the charming grin and cold ambition, a man who had always wanted Damon's throne, and now saw this fabricated engagement as weakness. He arrived late, as expected, dressed to provoke, and with a calculated smirk ready to strike. He leaned into Serafina with honeyed words and veiled insults, questioning her background, her taste, her reasons for choosing someone like Damon. He was subtle, never cruel outright, but the venom was there, wrapped in laughter. And Serafina did nothing. She smiled. She endured. She let him press. Until the candles flickered. Until the lights dimmed for a moment, though no one touched a switch. Until the room grew cold. And suddenly, Matthew coughed, once, then again. A violent, choking sound. His face turned red, his eyes wide. He clawed at his throat like something invisible had reached in and tightened. The room froze. Reginald stood, alarmed. Damon reached for his cousin. And Serafina simply turned her head, slowly. Matthew gasped. The choking stopped as suddenly as it began. He looked at Serafina with terror, not confusion, not panic, terror. No one said a word. The rest of dinner passed under a veil of unease. Matthew left early, pale and shaken. Reginald, though composed, said little. His eyes kept drifting to Serafina, not with suspicion, but with something close to reverence. Damon, for the first time in years, felt like a stranger at his own table. After everyone was gone, the penthouse returned to silence. Damon stood near the window, staring at the city that once bowed to him. Serafina stood behind him, still and waiting. He didn't ask what happened to Matthew. He didn't want to hear a lie. And deep down, he feared the truth. But in that silence, something shifted. Not between them, within him. Because for the first time in his life, Damon Thorne wasn't sure if he was the most powerful person in the room. End of Chapter 2 cliffhanger. That night, as Damon slept, restless, half-drunk on questions, he dreamed of fire and storm. He saw Serafina standing in a circle of symbols drawn in ash, speaking in a language he didn't understand. Her eyes glowed. Her hands bled light. When he awoke, his palms were warm, as though he had held something burning in his sleep. And beside his bed, where no wind could have reached, the candle had gone out. Chapter 3, her name was erased. Damon Thorne did not believe in ghosts. He believed in data, deals, and ruthless decisions. But disbelief meant little when the world around him began to shift in ways logic couldn't explain. In the days that followed the dinner, a restlessness followed him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. The night's dream, if it had only been a dream, haunted him. Flames. Symbols. Her eyes glowing with something not human. And that candle, cold and extinguished by no breeze. He told himself it was stress. Pressure. Perhaps even guilt. But denial crumbled every time he looked at her. Serafina moved through his life like she had always belonged there. She slipped into interviews with grace, met investors with calm precision, and even posed for a photo shoot in the penthouse garden, her hand resting gently on Damon's chest like it had known the curve of his suit forever. The media ate it up. Headlines hailed their engagement as the most unexpected romance of the year. The stock price climbed. Reginald seemed satisfied. The board fell silent. Everything was working. Too perfectly. And that's what made Damon uneasy. One morning, as he stood watching her from his office window, Serafina below in the courtyard garden, her fingers lazily trailing through a stone fountain, he felt something unnatural in the stillness. It was like time bent around her, softened for her. Birds landed near but not on her. The water curved away from her touch as if acknowledging her. That afternoon, Damon gave a quiet order to his private investigator. He needed to know everything about her. Not the background she had given him. The one neatly typed and handed over in their first meeting. He wanted the truth. Real history. Paper trails. Legal documents. School records. Digital footprints. But what came back was silence. Her name, Serafina Blackwood, did not exist. Not before 5 years ago. No birth certificate. No driver's license before that date. No tax records. No photos. No digital presence. It was as if someone had fabricated her identity from smoke and illusion. Even more disturbing, the address she had listed as her former residence was gone. Not abandoned. Erased. The building had burned to the ground 5 years ago. The official report listed no tenants. No owner. No insurance. Nothing. Damon stared at the folder in his hands. His investigator, a man who'd once found a hidden account in the Cayman Islands in under an hour, looked genuinely rattled. She's not just hiding her past, the man said. It's like her past doesn't want to be found. But Damon wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. He needed more. That night, while she slept in the guest wing, serene and unbothered, Damon descended into the digital depths himself. He wasn't a hacker. But he knew how to follow trails, especially when something was off. He searched name variants, scanned archived newspapers, cross-checked everything that might even resemble the person now living under his roof. And that's when he found it. An article. Yellowed, scanned from an old book. The print was faded, the paper scorched. But the name still whispered across time. Serafina Blackwood, 1893. Witch. That was the word etched beside it. The article told the story of a woman with the same name, accused of practicing dark arts in a rural town outside Massachusetts. She had vanished before trial. Locals claimed she was never seen again. Fires followed. Crops died. People whispered. And then the town disappeared from maps entirely. Damon stared at the date again. 1893. Impossible. Ridiculous. But still, there she was. The same name. The same eyes, staring out from a grainy photo. The image sent ice down his spine. It wasn't just similar. It was her. Exactly her. As if time had touched everything else but her face. And suddenly, his penthouse no longer felt safe. It felt like a cage, one he had built, and one where he had willingly invited something that should not exist. But still, he didn't send her away. Because something darker had begun to stir inside him. Not fear. Fascination. He watched her sleep from the shadows that night, the curve of her shoulder under silk sheets, the stillness of her breathing, the way her hair fell like shadow over her neck. She looked peaceful. Human. But the candle by her bedside flickered. Not with breeze, but with pulse. As though it recognized what she truly was. End of Chapter 3 Cliffhanger. At dawn, Damon finally closed his laptop. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. Because behind every lie Serafina had told lay something ancient. Something powerful. And now, something inside him whispered what he feared the most. He wasn't falling in love with her. He was falling under her spell. Chapter 4, The Mark of the Witch. The deeper Damon Thorne searched, the less sense the world made. He had spent his life dismantling illusions. Stripping lies down to their bone. That was how he'd built Thorne Industries, by mastering control. But now, control was slipping through his fingers like ash. And Serafina Blackwood was the storm behind it. After discovering the 1893 article, Damon couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. Even the click of his phone screen felt louder. The noise of the world, once predictable, was now tainted by the quiet question that haunted every corner of his mind. What is she? So he did what men like him weren't supposed to do. He asked for help. Not from lawyers. Not from tech experts or intelligence firms. From someone older. Stranger. Someone whose office was not in a tower but tucked between forgotten buildings in Brooklyn. A place the city had almost swallowed whole. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Voss. A historian of the unseen. A scholar of folklore, the occult, the mythologies buried beneath polite society. Her books were banned in half of Europe, and her lectures were whispered about behind closed doors. Damon didn't believe in mystics. He believed in proof. But when he walked into her candlelit study, surrounded by symbols and faded maps, something in him paused. Not out of fear, but recognition. As though part of him had been here before, even if he hadn't known it. He handed her the article. The old, brittle paper with Serafina Blackwood's name printed beside the word witch. Dr. Voss read it in silence. Then, slowly, she looked up at him. You found her, she said, not surprised, but almost sad. I found a name, Damon replied. No, Voss said. You found her. The historian leaned back, folding her thin hands. There are stories, not the kind told in fairy tales, but the ones buried in bloodlines and burned out of books. Stories of women who weren't born, but returned. Who carried centuries in their skin. Who never died, because death refused to touch them. Damon said nothing. She's not just a witch, Mr. Thorne, Voss whispered. She's a mark. A mark? Throughout history, women like her have appeared beside powerful men at turning points. Kings. Generals. Emperors. Men on the edge of transformation. Some called them muses. Others called them omens. But they were never simply women. They were the catalyst. The curse. Or both. Damon's mouth was dry. Why me? He asked. Voss smiled faintly. Because you were arrogant enough to lie to fate. And she accepted the invitation. Damon stood to leave, but her final words followed him out like smoke. Whatever you owe her, Mr. Thorne, she will come to collect. That night, Damon returned to his penthouse. But nothing felt familiar anymore. Serafina was waiting, seated on the terrace, moonlight painting silver onto her skin. She didn't ask where he'd been. She didn't need to. Her gaze met his as though she had already seen the entire day unfold, past, present, and future. And yet, she said nothing. She simply smiled. But her silence held weight. As if she knew what he had learned. As if she had allowed it. Later, as he tried to sleep, his dreams betrayed him again. This time he saw himself, older, distant, crowned in power but hollowed by regret. And beside him, always her. Untouched by time. Her eyes never changing. When he woke, his chest burned. Not from fear. From longing. End of Chapter 4 Cliffhanger. At the edge of dawn, Damon walked to the bathroom sink and splashed cold water on his face. But when he looked up at the mirror, he didn't see his own reflection. He saw Serafina standing behind him, hand on his shoulder, her face close, her mouth whispering words he couldn't hear but somehow felt. And on his neck, faint, glowing in the reflection but not on his skin, was a mark. A symbol. The same one from the contract she gave him on the first night. Chapter 5, The Price of Power. It began with a lie. A single sentence spoken in arrogance, "I'm already engaged." Now, Damon Thorne stood on the precipice of losing everything, not because of that lie, but because of what answered it. Serafina Blackwood. The name was not hers. Not truly. Names were fragile things for someone like her, things she shed like skin over centuries. She had been known by many, loved by few, feared by most. But Damon had given her a reason to return. Not to love. Not to belong. But to collect. The mark on his neck was no tattoo. No trick of the mirror. It was a binding, an ancient seal drawn from a pact older than language. The favor he had agreed to when he signed her contract wasn't negotiable. It never had been. For weeks now, she had played the role flawlessly. His fiancée in the public eye. The charmer of investors. The whisper behind his rising stock. She was everything he needed, exactly when he needed it. But behind the elegance, behind the soft words and measured glances, she had been weaving threads of fate around him. And now the threads were tightening. She found him in the study that night. He was staring at the city again, the skyline that had once felt like a monument to his genius. But now it looked like something brittle. Fragile. "Why me?" he asked without turning. She said nothing at first. Only stepped closer, until her voice floated near his ear like smoke. "Because your soul was arrogant enough to summon me." He turned then, slowly. Her eyes were glowing again, not with fire, not with cruelty, but with something that felt eternal. A sadness. A knowing. "I never asked for this." "You didn't have to." Outside, thunder rumbled though no storm had been forecast. The lights in the penthouse dimmed, flickered, then held steady. All around them, the world shifted. As if time had paused to watch what would happen next. Serafina stepped closer, and this time, she placed her palm against his chest. Not to charm. Not to seduce. But to remind him. The mark pulsed. Damon's breath caught. He felt it now, not just in the mirror, not just in dreams, but inside his bones. A binding. A tether. "You gave me 30 days, she whispered. "And I gave you everything you needed to win." He nodded slowly. "And now? I pay." Serafina didn't answer with words. She only lifted her other hand, revealing something wrapped in silk, an old, rusted key. Small. Ornate. Ancient. "This is the favor," she said. He looked at it, confused. "A key? A door will appear to you tomorrow. Not everyone can see it. But you will. You must open it. And walk through. Alone. What's on the other side? Whatever you've always wanted." He laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "And what's the cost?" "You," she said softly. "Everything you think you are." The next morning, the world moved as always. His office was still buzzing, investors still celebrated him, headlines still crowned him a visionary. But Damon saw the door. It stood in the corner of his conference room, unnoticed by anyone else. A door of old black wood and runes carved deep into its frame. It pulsed with quiet power. The key in his hand felt warm. Alive. He hesitated only once. Then stepped forward, and unlocked it. What waited beyond was not fire. Not pain. But a vision, of himself, surrounded by greatness far beyond money. A world where his influence shaped more than markets. A future built on something deeper than greed. Legacy. power. Eternity. It was everything he had wanted. But when he turned, Serafina was no longer there. She had never followed him through. And that was the price. He would have it all, but he would be alone. Not by curse. By choice. Because in accepting her gift, he had become something else. No longer just a man. No longer just Damon Thorne. He had stepped into the realm of those marked, chosen, reshaped by ancient hands. He returned to the real world the next day. The company soared. The board applauded. The city bowed. But when he stood alone in his penthouse and looked in the mirror, his reflection was no longer quite the same. His eyes had changed. His heartbeat felt quieter. And on the wind, sometimes in dreams, he still heard her voice. She had kept her promise. She had saved him. And in doing so, she had taken the last piece of him that was truly human. End of chapter 5, final cliffhanger note. Some say Damon Thorne never aged after that. Some say he vanished. Others say he walks among kings and monsters now, a man who once lied to fate and was answered by a witch with a velvet smile. A lie made him powerful. But she made him eternal. And the door? It waits for the next name bold enough to speak a lie in the face of destiny.